Okay, picture this for a second. You're looking at your bank statement and there's actually money left over after the bills, after everything.
Groundbreaking. Truly science fiction content right there.
I know. Stay with me though, because that leftover cash, it puts you in front of a choice that's honestly bigger than people realize. Like this could be the difference between retiring on a beach somewhere or eating ramen in a studio apartment at 75.
Very specific imagery, but go on.
So the question is, do you take that extra money and just hammer away at your debt, or do you invest it and let compound interest do its thing quietly in the background? And this isn't a Netflix or Hulu kind of decision. We're talking over a lifetime. This one choice can swing hundreds of thousands of dollars. Maybe, if things line up, millions.
Millions from one decision?
From one decision repeated over decades, yeah. Which is basically why the show exists, honestly. I'm Frank, this is Talk and Wonder, and most weeks it's me going a little too deep into stuff like this so you don't have to.
And I'm Lynn, and my job is mostly to stop him before he starts talking in spreadsheets.
She's not wrong. And here's the thing that gets me. Most people don't run the numbers on this at all. They just go with their gut, which is about as reliable as a magic 8-ball for retirement planning.
Honey, that's basically how we picked our first couch.
Okay, fair. Different stakes, though. Look, before we get into the actual mechanics of this, I want to be clear what we're not talking about. We're not talking about whether you should pay off like a credit card bill from a shopping spree you don't want to think about.
No judgment on the 17 phone cases.
No judgment. We're talking about the real strategic fork in the road, the one that actually separates people who build wealth from people who spend their whole life quietly making their bank rich through interest.
Okay, so is there a right answer, like a real one?
There isn't, actually, and that's probably why this question makes your brain hurt every time it comes up. But there are principles, real ones, that point you toward what makes sense for you specifically. So let's start with something that might genuinely surprise you.
Go.
Building momentum. When you pay off debt, you are functionally earning a guaranteed return equal to whatever interest rate that debt was charging you. So say you've got a credit card sitting at 22%. Pay it off, and that's like locking in a risk-free 22% return. Try finding that anywhere in the stock market.
I mean, I'll wait.
Right, exactly. You won't find it. Now, the market, historically, over long stretches, averages somewhere around 10% a year. But historically and long stretches are doing a lot of work in that sentence because the market does not care about your timeline. Some years it hands you 30%, other years it just takes 38% and keeps it.
Okay, that's the part that always makes me nervous.
So here's the actual million-dollar question, literally. Does it make sense to pay off a debt sitting at 5% when the market could maybe get you 10? On paper, the math looks almost insulting, it's so obvious.
Wait, so it's just invest and pocket the difference?
And that's what the math says, yeah. But math, if math were the only thing that mattered here, we'd all be driving the world's most boring cars. And actually, no, let me back up. Because there's a piece of this that the math completely leaves out. Risk, that's the piece the math skips over. When you pay down debt, that guaranteed return I mentioned, nothing touches it. No market crash can take back the interest you're not paying anymore. No recession can undo honestly, the psychological relief of having one less bill hanging over your head every month. It's boring, it's predictable, it's locked in.
So debt payoff is basically the reliable partner who remembers your coffee order?
Kind of, yeah. Investing, on the other hand, investing is like dating someone who's incredible when things are going well and might just vanish the second you actually need them. The upside can be spectacular, but there's a real chance of watching your money evaporate faster than your gym motivation in January.
Okay, but you promised me numbers, actual numbers, not just vibes about dating.
Fair, let's do numbers. Say you've got a mortgage, $350,000, 4% interest, 30-year term. Your payments around $1,670 a month, and somehow you've scraped together an extra $1,000 a month you could throw at either option.
An extra $1,000? Sure, easy.
Work with me here. Option 1, you go full debt-slaying warrior mode. Throw that extra $1,000 at the mortgage every month. You'd be mortgage-free in about 14 and a half years instead of 30.
Wait, you cut it in half?
Basically, yeah. And you'd save around $140,000 in interest you'd never end up paying. But here's the interesting part. Once you're debt-free at year 14 and a half, you now free up both that original extra $1,000 and your old mortgage payment. That's $2,670 a month, all going into investments for the remaining 15 and a half years.
Okay, so run it. What's that turn into?
At a 10% average return, roughly $1.2 million in the investment account by year 30. Add back the interest you avoided by killing the mortgage early, and total wealth lands around it's 1.1 million total. Not bad.
Okay, that sounds genuinely great, actually.
It does, but hold on, because now let's flip it. Same person, same extra $1,000 a month, except this time they make only the minimum mortgage payment and invest that $1,000 from day one for the full 30 years.
So no debt-slaying warrior era at all.
None, just quietly investing every month for 30 years straight. And this is where compound interest starts flexing like it just joined a gym. That account grows to roughly $2.2 million. You'll pay about $250,000 in mortgage interest along the way, which stings a little.
Okay, here it comes.
But even after that interest cost, you're sitting at around 1.9 million in total wealth.
Wait, so the second path, the boring do-nothing extra path, actually wins?
By about $800,000. That's the gap between the two strategies. $800,000.
Jeez, Frank, that's not like pocket change money. That's your retirement actually looks different money.
It's the difference between your golden years being a financial struggle and them actually being golden. But, and I really need you to sit with this but for a second.
Why do I not like where this is going?
Because every single one of those numbers assumes a lot of things go exactly according to plan. They assume the market actually delivers that historical 10%, which over your specific 30 years, it might not. They assume you stick with the plan the entire time, no panic selling when things crash, and they assume nothing, no emergency, no job loss, forces you to cash out early.
So the mortgage example is kind of the best case scenario for the just invested argument?
Honestly, yeah, it's one of the more extreme cases. Mortgages have some of the lowest rates a regular person can get, often barely above inflation, which is why some finance nerds, me included, actually call it good debt, if that's even a real category. It's borrowed money so cheap that smart investors want to hang on to it as long as possible.
Okay, that phrase always sounds a little like a trap. Good debt.
It kind of is a weird phrase, I'll admit, but here's why it holds up. Inflation is quietly on your side when your debt is fixed rate. That $1,670 payment feels real today. In 20 years, pocket change.
Because everything else got more expensive except the mortgage.
Exactly. Your mortgage is frozen like a financial fossil, basically. Coffee gets more expensive, groceries get more expensive, your payment just sits there. In 15 years, you're paying that same $1,670 with dollars that are worth a lot less than they are right now.
So it's like paying back a loan in Monopoly money, but legally.
That's exactly it. And that's why some finance folks get weirdly excited about 30-year mortgages. You're borrowing expensive dollars today and paying them back with cheap dollars later, while whatever you invested in keeps pace with or beats inflation. You're playing both sides of that game.
Okay, but that's mortgages specifically. What about like everything else? Because I don't think my credit card is playing nice with inflation.
No, it is not. And this is where the whole conversation flips. Credit cards don't mess around. 18, 22, sometimes 29%. That's not debt. That's financial highway robbery with a smile.
Please don't remind me what mine's at.
I don't need to know, but here's the thing. There is no investment on planet Earth that reliably, safely beats a 29% interest rate. Sure, your cousin's got a hot stock tip.
Don't start with the cousin.
I'm just saying you're way more likely to lose your shirt than beat that rate consistently. So with high interest debt like that, you use the avalanche method. Attack the highest interest rate first, regardless of the balance. Mathematically, it saves the most money. It's not as satisfying as knocking out small balances first.
The snowball method, right? Where you get that little dopamine hit?
Right, the snowball method. But your bank account doesn't care about dopamine hits, it cares about math. Now, student loans sit in this weird middle zone, moderate rates somewhere between your mortgage and your credit card, sometimes with a tax deduction that lowers the real rate even further. Some are sitting at 3, 4%, which starts drifting into maybe invest instead territory.
But there's a catch, isn't there? There's always a catch.
There's always a catch. Unlike your house, you can't sell your education to get out from under that debt if things go sideways. And car loans? Car loans are their own strange case because cars are depreciating assets. They lose value every single day, faster than your motivation to hit the gym after New Year's. So when you're making extra payments on a car loan, you're basically paying more money to own something that's becoming worth less every day you own it.
Okay, that's a genuinely depressing way to put it.
It's like paying premium ticket prices for a movie that somehow gets worse every time you rewatch it. Purely on the math, it often makes more sense to just invest that extra money and let the car depreciate on its own schedule.
Okay, so rates, debt types, all of that. What about just who you are? Like, does it matter how old you are?
Massively, actually. If you're 25, steady income, decades until retirement, you can afford to take more risk. Markets crash, sure, but you've got time to recover, time to ride out the volatility and actually catch those long-term returns.
But if you're not 25,
If you're 55 and retirement's suddenly not some abstract future thing anymore, a crash hits completely differently. You don't have decades to recover from a bad downturn. Suddenly, that guaranteed return from paying off debt starts looking a lot more attractive than chasing market upside.
okay, but that's not just an age thing though, right? Because I sleep so much better knowing we don't have some balance hanging over us, even if technically we're leaving a little money on the table.
No, that's real, and it's not irrational. It's your risk tolerance and honestly your personality. Some people need that debt-free feeling to sleep at night. Other people are perfectly happy carrying low-interest debt forever if it means their money's working harder somewhere else.
And then there's the boring practical stuff too, like debt payments eat into your monthly flexibility.
Right, and that matters more than people think. If you lose your job or something breaks or life just happens, having money locked in investments doesn't help you the way cash flow does. You can't pay your electric bill with unrealized gains.
Trust me, I've tried explaining that one to the electric company.
So, and this is a real legitimate option people overlook, you don't have to pick one. You can split it. Half toward debt, half toward investing. It's not the mathematically optimal move, but it hedges your bets, and it might just help you actually sleep.
Because this was never purely a math problem to begin with.
Exactly. It's psychology, it's risk management, it's your whole life plan all tangled into one decision. Now, before either of you touch debt or investing, there's a step people skip constantly, and it's the one that actually protects everything else.
The emergency fund lecture. Here we go.
The emergency fund lecture, yes. You need 3 to 6 months of expenses just sitting there, earning basically nothing, looking boring in a savings account. I know it feels like teaching your goldfish calculus while inflation laughs at you.
Accurate.
But if your car turns into an expensive paperweight and you've got zero cushion, guess what happens to your brilliant debt payoff plan or your investment strategy? You're either yanking money out of the market at the worst possible time or piling new debt onto the pile you're trying to kill. It's like filling a bucket with a hole in the bottom.
Okay, so it's insurance, basically. Insurance against your own plan falling apart.
Exactly that. And speaking of things people don't think about, taxes. When you pay off a mortgage early, you might be giving up a deduction, since mortgage interest is often tax deductible. Uncle Sam's technically subsidizing part of your housing cost.
Wait, so keeping the mortgage is a tax strategy now?
Well, sort of, but don't get too excited about that, because getting a deduction just means you're spending money to save a smaller amount of money. It's like being thrilled about 50% off something you didn't need in the first place.
Okay, that one hit a little close to home.
Investment taxes have their own wrinkle, too. You'll eventually owe capital gains on profits in a taxable account, but long-term rates are usually lower than regular income tax, so that 10% return might actually behave more like 8% after taxes, which nudges the whole calculation again.
Curious, and this is where the retirement accounts come in, right? The 401k stuff?
Exactly. This is where 401ks and IRAs become genuine game changers. If your employer offers a match and you're not contributing enough to get the full match, you are leaving free money on the table, literally free. Your boss saying, for every dollar you save, I'll hand you 50 cents.
Only a financial masochist turns that down.
Only a financial masochist. But numbers, rates, tax brackets, all of it, none of it matters if you can't actually stick to whatever plan you pick, and that's a whole different beast entirely. Behavioral psychology. You can run every number perfectly, but if you can't actually stick to the plan, the math becomes irrelevant faster than a smartphone from 2010.
Okay, this is the part where you describe me, isn't it?
I mean, a little. Some people are natural debt haters. They see that balance sitting there and it haunts them, genuinely like a bad breakup they can't get over. They'll give up potential investment gains just to sleep peacefully without that number looming over them.
And there is nothing wrong with that. Peace of mind has value. It just doesn't show up on a spreadsheet.
No argument there. Other people are the opposite, totally comfortable carrying debt as long as the numbers work in their favor. They'll finance a car at 0% and invest the cash they could have used to just buy it outright. They treat debt like a tool, not some emotional weight.
So which one are you?
Okay, fair. I'm probably more the second type, and you're more the first, and somehow that's worked out fine for 15 years.
Somehow.
But here's the thing. Neither approach is wrong. It depends on your personality, your situation, and honestly, your ability to stick with whatever you pick through the good years and the bad ones. The actual worst outcome? Switching strategies every couple years based on whatever's happening in the market or whichever finance guy is trending this week.
Okay, last thing. You mentioned inflation earlier, flipping the whole script. What did you mean by that?
Right. So we've lived through a stretch of pretty low inflation for so long that people kind of forgot it's even a variable. But when inflation heats up, fixed-rate debt becomes your best friend, and just sitting on cash becomes your worst enemy. Your debt payments get cheaper in real terms every year, while investments, real estate, stocks, tend to keep pace or beat inflation. Suddenly, carrying that debt doesn't feel like a burden, it feels like a strategic move. You're basically being paid to borrow.
And if inflation goes the other way?
During deflation, which is rare but not impossible, debt gets more expensive over time, and cash gets more valuable. That's when paying things off early suddenly looks like genius-level planning.
Okay, but real talk for a second. All of this assumes life just goes according to plan.
It doesn't, though, does it? Life throws the curveballs right when you think you've got it all figured out. You lose a job, go through a divorce, a medical thing happens out of nowhere, you decide to go back to school. None of the spreadsheets account for that.
So, bottom line, after all of that.
Bottom line, there's no one-size-fits-all answer here. It depends on your interest rates, your risk tolerance, your whole situation. High-interest debt? Attack it like it owes you money. Low-interest debt, let it hang around and let your investments do the heavy lifting instead.
And either way,
Stop overthinking it. The biggest financial mistake most people make isn't picking the wrong strategy. It's spending so much time perfecting the plan that they never actually start one.
which honestly might be the most useful thing you've said all episode.
I'll take it. If any of this got you actually looking at your own numbers tonight, save the episode, run your situation, maybe drop where you land in the comments.
And obviously, this is us talking through the general principles, not sitting across from your actual finances. So, use your judgment.
Always. We'll see you next time.